Hello students, today we have a new lecture in literary criticism entitled Romantic Literary Criticism. So actually when we go through the history of criticism in general, we are going to see that part of it is, or let's say there's this part in the history of literary criticism which is related to Romanticism. And maybe most of us have studied romantic poetry, maybe some of us have read novels that are considered to be part of the romantic tradition. But what does it mean that we have a literary criticism which stems from Romanticism? Of course, we know that literary ages, when we are speaking about literary movements or literary ages, each time has its own, let's say, qualities or characteristics or theories concerning literature. So each let's say movement or literary age, when it comes or when it first starts to appear, we can think of the first thing that happens is that they reject the previous one, or they are something like a reaction against the previous one. So in order to show how they think about the previous movements, literary movements, what they do is that they are actually doing a criticism of the previous ones. So when we speak about romantic tradition, we will see that they are interested in showing how the previous age, which is the new classical, the 18th century, the Augustan, the new classical period, how does it fail in let's say in showing literature in a way that they think is not does not let's say follow the spirit of literature. What does it mean that we have literature which reflects society? Okay, so we are going to see here what are the basic features of romantic literary criticism. What is romantic literary criticism? Before spreading to the rest of Europe, Romanticism initially appeared in Germany. Actually, the term Romanticism is a very wide one, very large, and it has a philosophical dimension. So we shouldn't think about Romanticism just in England. Romanticism is something that's spread in whole Europe, and it's believed that it started in Germany first. Okay, so but when it comes to England, because we are studying English literature, so we are more concerned about what was the Romanticism in England like. Okay, so in England, romantic criticism came as a response to the new classical movement in literature, just a reaction, a response against the new classical. And if you want to refresh your memories concerning the new classical period, you will see that in this period literature was very strict. Writers, let's say critics, like for example you know, names such as Jonathan Swift, like Alexander Pope, like John Dryden, all these different names, Sir Philip Sidney, they were basically following this let's say this idea of rules. As a writer in literature, you have to follow certain rules, and we are talking here about rules in writing, rules concerning the style, concerning the diction, the choice of words, concerning the language you are using. There are certain rules you have to follow. I mean, there are something like a list of do and don't. You see, that's why it's called new classical, because they follow the classical rules. They just brought the same let's say the same notions, the same ideas of the classical period, and they renovated them. That's why they are called new classical. Okay, so the year 1798, that marks the official beginnings of Romanticism, as this year saw the publication of lyrical ballads. So when it comes to England, if someone would say, well, what is the time in which we can say this is the time that first we saw romantic literature appears in England, it was in 1798. And why specifically this period, or let's say this year? Because it was the year of the publication of lyrical ballads, which was written by Wordsworth and Coleridge. And we all know that When we speak about romantic English literature, we are talking about the pioneers of this movement, the top of the poets and writers of this movement. We are talking about Wordsworth and we are talking about Coleridge. And both of them wrote a book which is called Lyrical Ballads. Students of literature, of course, are familiar with this information. What does literary, or let's say romantic literature, look like? Actually, it is, if we want to give a word which describes romantic literature, it is impressionistic. What does it mean? From the word impression, of course. What is this impression that the work of literature leaves inside you as a reader? Okay? It is more about the impression, the feelings that you are left with after reading a literary work. Okay, this is what matters. For the romantics, this is what matters. This is what they think is the important thing about all these literary works. And individualistic. Again, you see, the other feature of romantic literature is that it is individualistic. What does this mean? It means that it is more concerned with the individual experience. It is more concerned with this person as an individual by himself. He has his own thoughts, his own identity, his own ideas, and they are important. We cannot say that this person is important just because he lives in a certain society and his importance comes from the society he lives in. No, each individual is important alone, is significant alone. You see, this is why we call it individualistic. And that's why when you read the romantic literature, you see that they speak so much about their personal and individualistic experience, which was not familiar in the New Classical period. In the New Classical period, writers were not at all encouraged or welcomed to speak about or to write about their personal experiences. For example, a personal love experience. Or some kind of suffering that this poet or a writer has. They were not allowed to speak about such things because they believe that it is just for you as a person. This experience, it matters to you, just you. So why would you speak to us about such things that are private or individual just for you? Okay, as a member of society, you have to say something that would benefit all the society. Okay, you see, this is what New Classical people say. Romantics say, no, each individual experience matters. Okay? Freedom of inquiry is its keynote. So, also, I mean, when we speak about individuality, when we speak about the impression the work leaves, the feelings, we are also talking about freedom. So, as a writer, you have this freedom in order to express yourself. Okay? In order to show what are the thoughts, the feelings that you have. It is concerned with the fundamentals, such as the nature of poetry and its function. You see, and not merely with the problems of a style, diction, or literary genre. So the New Classical, as I told you, the New Classical writers were more concerned with the style of writing, that, for example, there is a certain form in poetry, you have to follow this form. For example, if they believe that, for example, if the epic is the best form in poetry, as a poet, you have to write your poems all in the epic form, for example. Or if they believe that the sonnet is the best form in poetry, then as a poet, if you are going to write poetry, you should follow this rule. You have to write sonnets. But if you write, for example, ballads, ballads are kind of lyrical poetry. There is some kind of music or quality of songs in such poems, and also the topics are things that are very rustic and related to ordinary human beings. So if you write about such things, then you are violating the rules, and your literature is considered to be low, not some of let's say high literature. Okay, so they were more concerned. And if you notice, these things like style, diction, literary genre, diction here means the choice of words, what kind of words you use, what kind of figures of speech you are allowed to use. Okay, if you notice, these are not things related to the content, because concerning the content, new classical poets and writers believe that actually the content should be something that teaches people certain values or morals or virtues. That's all. There is nothing very much. We don't have very much things to say about the content, but in terms of style and in terms of the forms, no, we have to pay attention. We have style, diction, literary genre. But when it comes to romantics, notice what they are interested with: nature of poetry and its function. What kind of poetry you are writing, and how does it impress people? How does it influence them? How does it, for example, encourage them? How does it make them feel? You see, it's more about feelings when it comes to romanticism. The common man received immense prominence as a result of the French Revolution. Why the Romantics are very much interested in the common man, or the ordinary people, or the people who are living, let's say, in the countryside, farmers, ordinary people. Not, for example, when we look at the literature of the classical period, we are going to see the characters in this literature are mainly people from high rank, kings, maybe soldiers, maybe warriors, scholars sometimes. So why there are people who are prominent in society, but when it comes to the Romantic period, we see that, for example, a poem is about the chimney sweeper. You know this poem by William Blake, منظف المداخن, William Blake. It speaks about a boy, a very ordinary boy who works in sweeping chimneys. So the common man received immense prominence as a result of the French Revolution. This is because of French Revolution, because this revolution has stirred not only France but all Europe. The idea of fighting for your right, revolting against injustice. You see? So this gave more prominence to ordinary people. Ordinary people are as important as these people from high society. So during the French Revolution, the monarchy of France was overthrown and the authority of the people was established. So now the voice is for people. People are the power. They are the ones who should be ruling. So there was given more importance to the individual. The ideals of new classicism, such as decorum, order, normality of experience, and moderation, were increasingly displaced by an emphasis on individual experience. You see, the word moderation is really interesting, moderation, because we are going to see that romantics are somehow considered to be extreme. They don't like usual things. They are very charmed and fascinated with exotic things, revolutionary things, or ideas, especially the second generation of romantic poets. Okay, an emphasis on originality and genius supplanted the primacy of imitation of classical authors. You remember the new classical writers? I told you earlier that they brought the classical theories and they brought the classical forms and they tried to renovate them. يعني حاولوا إعادة إحياء الكلاسيكية، الأشكال الكتابة الكلاسيكية. What does it mean? It means that, for example, you take the example of a certain author and you write like them. For example, you take the example of Homer and you write your literature just like Homer wrote his works, for example. So the Romantics said, why would the writer imitate other writers? Why not be original? What's wrong with being original? You have your own genius. You can be original by yourself. Write your own ideas, your own forms. Just be free to express yourself, you see? So they rejected this kind of imitation of classical authors or nature, even nature. It was no longer necessary to follow the masters. The poet had the freedom to choose his own poetic devices, meters, and diction. Okay, so just be yourself, be original. What's wrong? with being original. Who said that the masters are the greatest writers and we should follow them? Who said that? And why we should believe in that? Romantics believed in the power of human mind to imagine and then create literature. And this is another element which is important in in Romanticism. That is imagination. Now, as a writer, I have my own imagination. Why can't I use my imagination and create certain settings, create certain characters just out of my mind? Why it was forbidden? It was forbidden in the New Classical to write such things. Okay, so with the Romantics, imagination has a very important and crucial role in writing literature, and you are going to see that Coleridge, specifically Coleridge, has written something really interesting about imagination in his book Biographia Literaria. If you are interested, you can go there and see what he has. Wordsworth. Now let's see. Basically, I'm going here to talk about Wordsworth and Shelley. Let's see Wordsworth. What is his theory? Wordsworth laid down his poetic theory in the preface to Lyrical Ballads. You remember this book? There is a preface that was added to the second edition of this book, and in this preface means something like an introduction, Wordsworth talked about what does it mean to write poetry, or how you should write poetry. You see, that's why we think of that in Romanticism we have something related to literary criticism. It was here that Wordsworth gave his now famous definition of poetry as the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. So as let's say as a poet, for example, I want to write. What is this thing that I should rely on? He says the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings that the poet recollected in tranquility. Recollected in tranquility. And this is another important thing here. Just I want to make it okay, that the poet recollected in tranquility. It means that you have experienced these feelings, and they are powerful feelings, of course, and then in a moment of quietude, as you are sitting there quiet, alone, tranquil, this is what the word tranquil means, and then you start to remember these feelings, and this is what makes you able to write poetry. Okay, the poet is a man speaking to man. So first of all, we said that poetry is kind of recollection of feelings. So we can think of Wordsworth as relying on what? Relying on memory. As a poet, you can rely on memory in order to write poetry. Okay. Other thing that characterizes the literary theory by Wordsworth, the poet is a man speaking to men. In Wordsworth's opinion, okay, poetry should have a purpose beyond just entertaining the reader. In poetry, man seeks to understand himself and the world around him more accurately. So it is more of what? Not just a man inside society writing in order to convey a message which is universal to all mankind, or some kind of moral message. No, you are just an ordinary man talking to another ordinary man. You see, a man speaking to man. And when you are talking to other men, what does this mean? It means that your language should be understood. So you shouldn't, as the New Classical were doing, you should not use a very artistic or very sophisticated language that is hard to follow, hard to understand, because the kind of words and expressions which are used, only someone who's a scholar or someone who has studied literature can read them. No, just write in the language of people. How people speak, what is the ordinary daily language they use, write with it. That's enough. Okay, there is no need to write in a language that just the learned people can understand. يعني لغة بسيطة وغير متكلفة، لغة الإنسان البسيط العادية. He advocates that the theme of poetry should be drawn from simple and rustic life, even the themes in your writing. Don't go through such kind of, let's say, very deep and philosophical or some kind of general or universal ideas or themes. Try to be very simple and take your themes from the simple life of simple people. Okay? So, according to Wordsworth, there are four stages of the process of poetic creation. These stages are observation, recollection, contemplation, and imaginative excitement. How does it happen? Look here. The poet observes certain objects of nature. Maybe you're going somewhere in nature and you had this beautiful experience with let's say with some elements of nature. So you observe that. You observe this thing in nature, and you know romantics were very obsessed with nature, specifically Wordsworth. In moments of tranquility, the poet recollects those emotions excited by the objects, situations, or phenomena. Later on, as you are sitting quiet, calm, you start to remember these beautiful things that you have observed and the feelings they have given to you. Okay, you start to remember the feeling. What happens next? He contemplates on these emotions. Okay, you start to think about them. You start to think about how can you express these feelings? How can you talk about them? Okay, after contemplation, there comes the gradual revival of the emotion. Thus, the poet is once again in a similar emotional excitement to what he experienced when he first saw the object. You see, so now imagination works on memory. So after you have remembered these feelings that you had in a past experience, you start to imagine yourself just having the same excitement that you had when you first felt these things. Okay, as if you are living the experience once again. And then when it happens, you are able to write about it. Okay, this is how what is the what Wordsworth think is the process that the creation of a poem goes through. Okay, now let's come to Percy Bysshe Shelley, who is another romantic poet, not only known for his important and beautiful poems, he is known also for a book which is called A Defense of Poetry, and it is part of the literary criticism tradition. Shelley wrote A Defense of Poetry in 1821 in response to an essay written by his friend Thomas Love Peacock. So it was actually a kind of, you see, some writers write something about a certain theory or idea, others may agree or disagree, so they would write something in return. A devotee of Plato's concept of ideal forms. So what do we know about Shelley? Shelley was one of those who likes this idea that, or let's say Plato's idea or concept of the ideal forms. And if you go back to the lectures we had about Plato, you can remember what do we mean by ideal forms. Why he's fascinated with this, or why does he like it? All things around are mere representations of the ideal world. So the idea of having an ideal world, Shelley liked this idea. He liked that there is something behind what we see in real world, something let's say more valuable, more let's say real than the world we are living in, something more spiritual. Okay, for Shelley, Plato's forms intertwine with the romantic ideal of imagination. So you see, he linked these two concepts. Actually, he thought that Plato's idea of another world, which is a spiritual world of forms, is very similar to what the poet experienced in his imagination. When you are, for example, if you are living in your imagination, what does this mean? It means you are not in this world, you are in another world. You see, يعني عالم الخيال، احنا نقول عالم الخيال، يعني الإنسان كأنما هو مو بهذا العالم، في عالم آخر, something that you have created for your own. How does this happen? How can man create something out of this world? You see, so that's why Shelley liked this idea of Plato. Although, you know, Plato was against poets, you remember. But Shelley believed that this idea that let's say Plato came up with is very similar to the idea of imagination. And actually the Romantic poets believed that imagination is a kind of truth. You see, you can reach to truths about life through your imagination. What else? Poets enhance our sympathetic imaginations, and thus poetry is a force for moral good. By the way, Shelley was influenced by philosophers like William Godwin, for example. And part of this philosophy sees that man is good by nature. Okay? So poetry, according to Shelley, can lead man to what? Or can be a force that leads man to moral good, to be a good person. Teach him some kind of truth about life. And once you learn the truth about life, you become a good person. The idea of the poet as a visionary or a prophet. Okay? What does it mean that a poet can be visionary or a prophet? It means that the poet can see things not like the normal people see them. You see? As a poet, you have this gift, you have this ability to see things for their truth, not the way that other people, ordinary people, can't see what you see. Okay, and this is what does it mean? This is what makes prophet different from other people. يعني فكرة النبي اللي ممكن يتنبأ بالأشياء بناء على معطيات. You see, there are certain given things that you observe because you are a poet, because you have this kind of consciousness, this kind of being far-sighted. You can see things and come up with certain truth about them. Okay, so you have just the same ability that a prophet has or a visionary has. Okay, the primacy of the imagination and the ways in which the poet can change the world, becoming lawmaker. You see, he even believes that poets can be lawmakers, statesmen, and philosopher all in one. He actually believed that a poet has more importance, his role is more important than the role of lawmaker, statesman, and philosopher. Not only more important, actually you as a poet can be a lawmaker, a statesman, and a philosopher. You see, he believes that poets are great people who can lead society. You see, through their imagination, through their ability to see things beyond the let's say just this surface existence or what we see in real world, to see things beyond through their imagination, through their visions. Okay, Shelley argues that civilization advances and thrives with the help of poetry. To this extent, you can think about it like this. I mean, he even thinks that one of the reasons that civilizations advance and develops is poetry. That you can think about like this, that if a civilization or a nation doesn't have poetry, then it cannot thrive or it cannot develop. See, he's giving a very great role to poetry in society. Poetry is a mirror which makes beautiful that which is distorted. And here I want to point to this idea of mirror. This is really interesting and important, specifically for the students who study romantic poetry and romantic, let's say, literary criticism in general, or let's say the romantic theory. There is a very interesting book which is called The Mirror and the Lamp by M.H. Abrams. It's a very well-known book, actually, very famous, and actually Abrams has received many awards because of this book. It's a very beautiful one. It is based on the metaphor of mirror and the lamp. Here the mirror and the lamp, these are two metaphors. What does it mean? And what does it have to do with literary, let's say romantic literary theory? There is the traditional view of poetry as mimesis, or the portrayal or reflection of what already exists in the world. Okay, the traditional idea believes that poetry is a mirror. Okay, what does the mirror do? What do you, or let's say if I use a mirror now, if I look at a mirror, what do I see? I see my reflection exactly just like it is. I can see everything about my face, my shape, reflected accurately, exactly in the mirror. So the traditional view thinks that poetry should be just like a mirror. It reflects society like it is, just like it is. The principal criterion of poetry is the extent to which it accurately portrays the real world. How can you say this poetry is good or great? You can measure how much this poetry is accurate in showing the world as real as it is. Okay, just a reflection. Now let's see the other idea, the lamp. Okay, المصباح. The lamp metaphor represents an expressive type of poetry. So actually, if poetry just reflects, and it reflects accurately what is there in the real world, does it, do you think this is the best form of poetry that we could have? No, actually there is another one here. He says we have something like an expressive type of poetry. What does this mean? One that comes from the poet's innermost thoughts and ideas and brings something wholly new to the world. Actually, others like the Romantics, and here we are talking here what the Romantics had to offer in terms of literary theory. That poetry, according to the traditional way of thinking, no, it shouldn't be an exact image of the real world, just like we are holding a mirror. No, it should be, or let's say, it is more like a lamp. Now think about it. If you are in a place which is very dark and you bring this lamp and you place it on some parts of this place, what happens? Everything around the lamp becomes illuminated and bright. تمام؟ يعني المصباح يضيء على الأشياء، بس النور اللي يضيء هاي الأشياء منين جاي؟ جاي من داخل المصباح. The poet is just like a lamp. The light comes from the inside, not from the outside. The poet shouldn't be objective. The poet should be subjective. His ideas, his thoughts, his feelings should come from the inside. Just like the lamp, which gives light from its own in order to illuminate the world around. Okay? Not like the mirror. You should not reflect things just as they are, because if you do this, then you are just like a scientist. You are objective. All you are doing is showing things the way they are, but you are being objective. What about your feelings? What about how you think about these things? Okay, what's so different then? If you look at the world around you and if you go to literature, you see it the same. See? But the poet, when he becomes like a lamp, reflecting his inner light, or let's say imposing his inner light on things around him, then we are going to see these things in a new light. We are going to see things in the world in a new way, which it comes from the innermost of this poet. Okay, this is the metaphor of the mirror and the lamp. Okay, the second and romantic, the second one, the lamp, is the romantic, okay, view of poetry as its criterion, the extent to which it accurately reflects the poet's depth of feeling or authenticity. Okay, يعني هي الفكرة شنو؟ انه وين الشيء الجديد بالموضوع؟ اذا كان الشاعر يعكس العالم كما هو، بهالحالة الشاعر مثل العالم، يعني مجرد يشوف الاشياء مثل ما هي وينقلها. وين دوره؟ شنو تأثيره؟ بينما إذا كان مثل يعني بهيج حالة يكون مثل المرآة، بس لما يعكس نظرته هو لهذا الشيء وفكرته وشعوره وإحساسه وانطباعه، فهو بالتالي يشبه المصباح اللي يضيء حوله. منين يضيء؟ يضيء من الضوء الداخلي اللي يطلع من عنده. أوكي؟ This is a very interesting book. I really recommend if you are a student of romantic literary theory, you have to read or at least read about this book and know what is it about. It's very beautiful and interesting. And I hope this was really helpful for you for romantic literary criticism. And I advise you actually to go and read more because it has a lot of resources and references out there. For example, you can read J.R. Watson, a book about romantic poets. It's very essential for students of literary criticism and for the romantic actually school. And I hope that I can see you in next videos soon. Thank you.